The truth about results that no one tells you about. And this podcast is more of like if I could go back in time and talk to 20-year-old Matt, this is what I would tell him. And I've been coaching, training, and working with people up to 20 years. And the number one reason why people fail at fitness is because they give a minor amount of effort for a major problem or a goal. And I used to struggle a lot with this, for really on my timelines on how long it would actually take to get good at something or to get better at something, and I would always get frustrated with myself because I was like, "Man, why aren't I better at this? I should be better at this by now." And it'd be like a week. So for a good example of this is when I first started CrossFit. If you don't know this, funny story, I used to really struggle with double unders. It took me 2 years to actually learn them, and I remember getting so frustrated and mad in a workout that I just threw the jump rope, and then after that, I just subbed it out with tuck jumps instead, just because I was just so fed up with it that I didn't wanna bother learning it anymore. And, I changed that mentality over time, and I learned that, you can do the right things the right way at the right time, but you need to do them for the right amount of time. So and that's probably the most important lesson that I learned because in order to fix that, in order to learn double unders, I finally committed to simply just doing them every day as my warm up and then learning it that way and doing drills and everything. And then over time, I eventually got it. And what I'm hoping is by the end of this episode, you'll know exactly why your timeline is the number one thing that's killing your progress, and then you'll have the mental tools to finally commit like a pro. And right now, just like how I was with my double unders, that you're probably frustrated because you expect results to match your effort and fast. Okay. And you're not broken. There's nothing wrong with you. It's just that you have bought into the wrong timeline. And most people quit within 3 months of starting their fitness journey, or they quit, within a few weeks or even a month of trying something new, like a new skill or something, if they're into fitness already. And it's not because they can't succeed, but it's because they expect overnight success. And fitness is hard, and thinking it should be easier makes it harder. And imagine instead of judging your progress every week, you would judge it over the course of an entire year, or I'd even argue over the course of 10 years, because there's so much to learn in fitness. And it's one of those things where, well, I mean, how much less stress would you feel and how much more consistent would you be if you did judge yourself over the course of 5, 10 years rather than just the week? And I struggle with this, and I'm sure you guys do too, but social media really lied to us. I mean, we see the highlight reels and the before and after pictures, and we start comparing ourselves, and then we're told, or at least we have the perception that success can happen fast. That's a huge selling point, right? I mean, if it was fast and easy, then of course people are going to buy stuff. And the reality is that real results come from doing boring, consistent things over the years. And I think people have this uh, mental thing when it comes to discipline that they think they need to be super hardcore and do like these extreme things. But it's not about being hardcore. It's about being clear on who you want to become and then acting like that person daily. So this is something that I use for one of my mental frameworks, and I hope this helps you. But I first identify my values. So what is this really for? And then I set my standards. So what actions need to match those values? And then I show up when it's inconvenient. And this is the whole game right here. Showing up and doing things when you don't want to do it is what's going to separate you, or going to separate the winners from the losers. And then use failure as data, not a reason to quit. So I just use it as a feedback loop, be like, well, what can I do differently and better next time? And then I play the long game. So I think in decades, not days. And that's probably one of the last two are probably the most important. And I just think of every high performer that I admire, and I know for a fact that they have days where they don't want to show up, just like I do. And I'm sure that there are days where you don't want to show up. And it's it's one of those things where when I was younger, when I was 20-year-old Matt, I would wait for myself to feel motivated. And the problem is when I would wait for myself to feel motivated, I've already lost. And so moving from there, it's more about building a system, so that way action is automatic. So it's more about taking action than it is about the goal itself. And so I've just put in systems to where I'm going to work out at this specific time, these days of the week, and I'm going to eat X, Y, and Z for breakfast. I would give myself 3 to 5 options for breakfast, 3 to 5 options for lunch, 3 to 5 options for dinner, and 3 to 5 options for snacks in between. And then I would only drink water and coffee. So I would kind of limit myself, but then I would have a system down so that way I knew exactly what I was doing when I was doing it, so I wasn't, you know, tempted into making poor decisions. And you have to find someone who depends on your success as well. So now that I'm older, it was a lot different when I was younger, so those systems were really helpful. But now that I'm older, I found that when I think about how my success impacts my family, then it makes it a lot easier to follow through with my actions. So, for example, I think about my kids. I want to be the best dad possible. I want to be physically fit. I don't want to be a liability. I want to be able to play with them when they get older, and I want to be able to play with my grandkids if my kids choose to have kids. I would love to be able to take my grandkids to Disneyland and be active and chase them around the park just like how I'm doing with my kids right now. I don't want to be a liability. I don't want my kids to have to take care of me. I want to be someone who's independent for as long as possible. I don't want anyone wiping my butt per se. I want to be wiping my own butt for as long as possible, and then I just want to just die. Um, and then commit to actions, not just outcomes. So kind of going back to my double under example, instead of just working on the outcome, which was to have double unders, I was like, every day I'm going to do some drills and practice my double unders every day as part of my warm up until I get it. So I just committed to that action. And guess what? Lo and behold, double unders now is one of my best movements. And if I didn't commit to that and I just worried about the double under itself, I probably would have never gotten it. But since I switched my mentality into just do it every day, do a drill every day, spend 10 to 15 minutes and eventually you'll get it, then, success became inevitable because it was just a matter of time. And once I switched to that, then I ended up getting it. So fun fact. And then I've never met someone who I look up to, and I've never met another high performer who says that they thought that success felt easy. Every time I meet someone successful, they always share with me some sort of horror story on the come up where they had to overcome multiple major setbacks or obstacles. And I realized that it was one of those things where they were doing the right things, they were doing it the right way. And when it came to actually sticking with it, despite all the obstacles that came in, that's what actually made it. That's what actually helped them make it to where they are. And they also did it despite how they felt. They didn't listen to their feelings. They just did it because that's what was required for success. And this is what I do too, is I picture myself 10 years from now looking back. Would I be proud of the route that I took? Would I be proud of if I took the easy route, or would I be proud to take the hard route? And I always think to where, if I'm 90 years old and I finally made it, am I going to look back and wish that I had less crazy stories? No, I'm going to wish I had some pretty crazy stories. And I look back now on some of the biggest things that I've had to overcome so far, and that they make for great stories today. So I wouldn't mind having a little bit more of those, even if it means trudging through the trenches a little bit more throughout my life. And right now, that you probably think that what you're doing is hard because you've only done easy things. And I remember thinking the same thing that, I'm like, why is this so hard? I would always, wonder why, why, and speaking of just fitness, I was always wonder why the Olympic lifts were so hard to learn. And then as I got older and once you go through life, you realize that you go through a lot harder things. And then instead of that, I stopped asking for things to be easier. And then I just was like, hey, I'm just going to get stronger and I'm just going to get better. I stopped, being wishy-washy. And then I also started viewing discomfort as a payment for the life that I wanted. It's like I'm gonna have to go through some discomfort to get better at fitness. I'm gonna have to go through some discomfort and some difficult conversations to bring my gym to the next level. I'm gonna have to go through some difficult conversations to make my relationship better with my wife and with my team at the gym. And it's not easy, but it ends up being worth it in the long run rather than doing nothing. And there is a cost. So you can either sacrifice I found out there was a cost over time, is that I can either sacrifice my goal or I can sacrifice the goal itself. So I can either sacrifice what I want, or I can sacrifice the goal itself. And uh results aren't about having coming back to a fitness context, results aren't about perfect programs. They're about relentless execution. So kind of like going back to my double unders, it was just about just getting the reps in and doing it every day, regardless of how I felt. And you can only focus on what you can control. So you can control your actions. So I stopped focusing on what I couldn't control, which was the outcome of getting those double unders. And I focused on what I could control, which was practicing those every day before I actually did my workout. And then I learned how to judge myself in terms of success by what I do and not by how I felt. So, and I would always feel embarrassed because I was like, "Man, I'm kinda decent at everything else, but these double unders are really holding me back." And I was embarrassed because, my friends could do them, I couldn't do them. But you know what? I just judged myself on what I could do and what I did do, which was practice them. And I redefined success, what success looked like. And to me, I made success was like, it was successful that I practiced for 10 to 15 minutes every time before my workout. And I do have a one question reset that I do ask myself and my clients was like, how would you feel if you reached the end of your life and realized that you didn't hit your goals because you were too tired, or insert said emotion instead of tired? And this really helps me because it makes me think long term. And this is kind of the point of the entire podcast. If you take anything away from this, that's what it is to stick with things over the long term, regardless of how you feel. So again, ask yourself, like, whether it be like I don't have time or I don't feel like it, and it sounds kind of silly when you insert this into this question, like how would you feel if you reached the end of your life and realized that you didn't hit your goals because you were too busy? And I think about that all the time, and that really helps because it prompts me into action as well, rather than sitting there and kind of either wallowing in self pity or whining about it and being like, why can't I do this? It's more of like I insert that said emotion, I feel the emotion, but then I get to work. And so I just start going into problem solving mode. And I like this because it takes the emotion out of it, because emotions really are essentially just hormonal responses triggered by our brain reacting to a situation, and it's either real or imagined. And emotion isn't magic, it's just chemistry. And I always remind myself of that um I remember I was working with a psychotherapist, and she told me, she goes, Matt, at the end of the day, emotions are just hormonal responses, and you have control over your actions. Like, and one of the best pieces of advice that she gave me was like, Matt, it's okay. You can allow yourself to feel the emotion. Take as long as you need. Take like 5 minutes. Feel it. Accept it, and then get into problem solving mode. And then because your body is literally dosing you with hormones based on how your brain interprets what's happening. And it's just interpretation. And I think most times, I do a terrible job at this, but I always am more of a catastrophic thinker. So I will definitely overthink things, and I will think they're actually way worse than they actually are. And also, like when it comes to pushing through the hard days, I'll end with this, and this is another piece of advice that I would give myself again, and I tell myself this all the time to this day, is that this is what hard feels like. And it's not gonna. And I always tell myself that being consistently uncomfortable and being able to push through the things that you don't want to do is the ultimate advantage. And how you feel right now is why no one else does what you do. And I just give myself that little pep talk, even if it isn't true, but I always give myself that pep talk in those moments, because it really helps pick myself up, and then allows me to get back on my feet and to actually get back to the task at hand. So my little call to action is this for you: that if this hit home, share this with someone who needs to hear it. I really hope this was helpful. And if you're not ready, and if you're ready to stop playing games and commit to the real work, let me know. I would love to chat with you on more strategies on how to mentally break through some of these plateaus. So feel free to shoot me an email, matt@redwolfcrossfit.com. I'm always here to help. And yeah, I really hope you guys found this helpful. This was just something on my mind lately. And so I wish you guys all the best of luck. So good luck, have fun, and nailed it.